A sudden voice echoed through the grand hall, abruptly silencing everything. An eerie stillness took hold, as the gathered leaders from various factions widened their eyes, their breath shallow. It was as if they couldn't fathom what they had just heard. That rebellious, blasphemous statement had been directed at none other than the Hundred Spirits King. He was the supreme ruler of the entire Hundred Spirit continent. A single command from him could wipe out any faction present. That kind of authority and power was enough to instill fear in anyone here. And yet, someone had just called him trash? At the thought of the Hundred Spirits King's impending wrath, the leaders all shuddered involuntarily. It was clear blood would surely be spilled in this hall today. In that dead silence, countless gazes, cold as if looking at a dead man, turned toward the figure standing behind Xun'er. Xun'er herself was stunned by the hand that had suddenly reached from behind to cover her soft lips. Her first instinct was to strike back with a punch, but the moment she heard that voice, it was as if the blood in her veins froze. She knew that voice all too well. Slowly, she turned around. What met her eyes was a handsome, smiling face. Compared to before, the youthful immaturity had faded. It was now tempered with a growing maturity and a sense of inexplicable reassurance. Chen. Xun'er stared blankly at the striking young man in front of her, murmuring the name almost unconsciously. It was as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Reaching out with her delicate hand, she gently touched his cheek. The warmth beneath her fingers made her eyes widen in shock. It really is you? How are you here? Chen chuckled. Of course, I came back to visit family. He gently lowered Xun'er's hand from his face and stepped forward with a grin, turning to the stunned Mufeng and the others seated nearby. Hey, Dad, cat got your tongue? Mufeng stared at Chen, eyes wide, still trying to process what was happening. Chen had left the Northern Spirit Realm many years ago, and not a day had passed when Mufeng didn't miss his beloved son. So now, seeing him appear out of the blue was beyond belief. You little brat, you finally decided to come home? It took a moment, but Mufeng finally came back to his senses and scolded him with a growl. Chen leaned in, smiling, and sat beside his father, patting him on the back. Calm down, old man. His gaze flicked to the bloodstain at the corner of Mufeng's mouth. Though his smile remained bright and warm, a sharp, icy glint passed through his pitch-black eyes. Mufeng, looking at the much more mature face of his son, felt a rush of emotion. But then he suddenly remembered something. His expression changed, and he quickly rose, clasping his fists toward the Hundred Spirits King. My lord, I beg your forgiveness. My son didn't know the situation, if he has offended you in any way. Mufeng had heard what Chen said earlier. Now, thinking back, cold sweat drenched him. The Hundred Spirits King was known for his narrow mind and ruthless nature. To be insulted so publicly by Chen, he would surely retaliate. Ha 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 ha. Before Mufeng could finish speaking, the Hundred Spirits King burst into wild laughter atop his throne. His voice echoed through the hall, but no one dared to laugh along. Everyone could hear the fury and murderous intent behind that laugh. Mufeng's face tensed. He instinctively stepped in front of Chen, determined, if need be, to die here today so that his son might escape. Xun'er also rushed forward, standing protectively in front of Chen, her eyes locked warily on the laughing king. All around them, the leaders of the various factions looked on with pity in their eyes. With the Hundred Spirits King enraged, Mufeng and his group from the Northern Spirit Alliance might not leave this hall alive. That boy really is the textbook definition of dragging his father down. Now the Northern Spirit Alliance is doomed. Some muttered quietly. Not that they were concerned, in fact, they were secretly pleased. If the Alliance were destroyed, it would open the door for them to seize power in the Northern Spirit Realm. The king's laughter went on for quite a while before gradually subsiding. He wiped the corners of his eyes, as if laughing to the point of tears. Someone actually called this king trash. Shaking his head with a twisted smile, he raised a hand and waved casually, his expression now laced with brutal cruelty. Break his limbs and toss him out. Beside him, the black-robed elder, a perfect Earth Supreme, coldly nodded. He stepped forward slowly, his gaze as venomous as a snake, locking onto Chen from a distance. Mufeng's heart chilled instantly, his eyes filled with anxiety. Xun'er also clenched her teeth, her jade-like hand tightly gripping a phoenix-shaped jade stone that appeared in her palm. If she crushed it, she could instantly take Chen, Mufeng, and the others and escape. Facing a perfect Earth Supreme, she could feel immense pressure. However, just as she was about to crush the stone, a hand reached over to stop her. Xun'er turned her head, looking at Chen with a worried expression. Chen, don't be foolish. A wise man doesn't pick fights when unnecessary. There's no need to clash with him here. She thought Chen was just being young and hot-headed, unwilling to back down. Chen was momentarily stunned by her words, then smiled and shook his head. Xun'er, don't worry. I'll handle it. With that, he looked up at the slowly approaching black-robed elder, whose overwhelming spiritual energy surged around him. The terrifying spiritual pressure filled the hall, and the elder clearly seemed to be trying to use his imposing aura to instill fear in them. Was it you who injured my father earlier? Chen stared at the black-robed elder, his brows slightly furrowed. The elder paused his steps, seemingly amused by Chen's question. A cruel smile tugged at his lips. Don't worry. Soon enough both you and your father will experience what true suffering is like. Chen smiled faintly, but there was no joy in his black eyes. He slowly extended his palm towards the black-robed elder and gave a slight squeeze. Boom. It was as if an invisible giant hand suddenly grasped the elder, causing his vast spiritual energy to explode. Before the elder could react, he felt an irresistible force lift him up, slamming him violently into the ground. Boom. The entire hall trembled, and everyone stood frozen in disbelief, staring at the scene before them. The black-robed elder, who had been so high and mighty, commanding life and death like a god, was now kneeling before Feng, his knees cracking the stone tiles beneath him. This. Everyone had a look of sheer shock, clearly unable to understand why a perfect Earth Supreme was suddenly kneeling before Feng. However, only those with sharp eyes could see the black-robed elder's expression of utter horror. He struggled desperately, but it was as if an incomprehensibly terrifying force was suppressing him, making it impossible for him to move. Tang Xun'er, Feng, Tang Shan, and the others all stared in shock, finally starting to comprehend what was happening. Since you did it, you should apologize to my father, Chen said coldly, looking at the black-robed elder. With a casual wave of his hand, the elder slammed his head onto the ground, the force causing the floor to crack beneath him. Ah! The black-robed elder screamed in agony, his head bloodied, but he continued to struggle desperately. Still not apologizing? Chen raised his brow slightly, lifting his palm again and slamming it down. Bang! 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 All the leaders in the hall stood frozen, staring in disbelief at the once untouchable super-strong elder, now reduced to a puppet in Chen's hands. With each wave of his hand, the elder's head slammed into the floor again, causing the stone floor to crack and sink deeper. The entire hall was deathly silent, except for the sound of the black-robed elder's head repeatedly crashing into the ground. Everyone felt cold sweat trickle down their backs, their fear rising to unimaginable heights. They looked at Chen, whose face held a faint smile, but who effortlessly treated a perfect Earth Supreme like a ball, understanding only now how terrifying this young man truly was. Bang! Amidst the continuous crashing sounds, the black-robed elder's head was covered in blood. Though it seemed like a small injury to him, his heart was filled with an overwhelming sense of fear. He finally realized just how terrifying the force holding him down was. Compared to this force, he felt like an insignificant insect. At this moment, he could no longer deny it. The young man before him, who appeared so calm, was undoubtedly a true heavenly supreme. He kicked a piece of iron so hard that it could have shattered his foot. Master, I was wrong. I apologize. At this moment, the black-robed elder no longer dared to argue. His heart was filled with utter panic. He knew that for a heavenly supreme to kill him would be as easy as flipping a hand. He immediately stopped resisting, his sharp voice trembling with fear, echoing through the grand hall. As the black-robed elder's shrill scream filled the air, Chen's hand stopped in mid-air. He spoke coldly. You should have apologized earlier. Now, leave. Saying this, he threw a punch. The air in front of him seemed to explode, and the black-robed elder was struck with immense force. His chest caved in, and his body was sent flying, carving a deep mark into the floor of the hall before slamming into a stone pillar, losing consciousness. Chen could feel the elder's spiritual energy shattering entirely under the impact of his punch. Even the elder's meridians had been crushed. Although Chen had spared his life, he had destroyed all of the elder's hard-earned spiritual power. The entire hall fell into a deathly silence, as if even breathing had ceased. The leaders from various factions trembled. This was a supreme earth expert at the peak of his stage, someone who could dominate the 100-spirit continent. Yet now, in the hands of this young man, he was like a helpless puppet, utterly powerless. Many of the leaders couldn't help but inwardly mourn. Was this young man really the son of Mufeng? They had all thought he was just a fresh-faced, naive youngster, but who would have guessed that he was actually a terrifying powerhouse hidden beneath the surface? With a casual flick, Mu Chen disposed of the black-robed elder, and his calm gaze turned towards the 100-spirit king, who was sitting in the seat of honor, his face ashen and eyes wide with shock. Mu Chen gave a slight smile and said seriously, "In my eyes, you're truly a waste." Mu Chen's smile echoed in the stillness of the grand hall, but this time, no one found it amusing. Instead, the many faction leaders of the 100-spirit continent were shaking with fear. They realized they had misjudged the situation. This handsome young man wasn't some naive rookie, but a true beast in disguise. From his terrifying power that easily crippled a peak Earth Supreme, they could tell, even if they were fools, that Mu Chen had to be a heavenly supreme. Although they had never seen such a young heavenly supreme before. This is truly a fight between gods, and the mortals are the ones suffering, they thought, not daring to even breathe. Whether it was Mu Chen or the 100-spirit king's terrifying background, both were beyond their reach, like gods who could easily decide their fate. So, facing a battle between gods, all they could do was shrink their heads and cower like turtles. While these leaders trembled in fear, Mufeng and the senior members of the Northern Spirit Alliance were also stunned, staring wide-eyed at the scene. Even Tang Xun'er's small lips parted slightly, her beautiful eyes full of shock. They hadn't expected the peak Earth Supreme to be so utterly powerless and fragile in Mu Chen's hands, like a mere puppet. The senior members of the Northern Spirit Alliance had been domain lords of the Northern Spirit Realm in the past, so they were quite familiar with Mu Chen. Back when they left the Northern Spirit Realm, he was just a somewhat immature youth, but who would have thought that when they saw him again, the once young boy had already reached a level they couldn't even imagine. In this oppressive silence, the 100-spirit king, sitting at the head of the hall, wore a dark expression. Though he was also shocked, he didn't seem as horrified as the others. After all, both his parents were heavenly supremes. So when Mu Chen's contemptuous words reached him, he was filled with anger. He sneered and said, "You're quite the imposing one. This bodyguard of mine is an elder of the Northern Profound sect. You've crippled him. Do you not regard the Northern Profound sect at all?" Mu Chen smiled at the words and replied, "Northern Profound sect? Never heard of it." The 100-spirit king sneered, saying, "My father is the sect leader of the Northern Profound sect, a heavenly supreme of the immortal grade." At this point, there was a trace of pride in his voice. Although he couldn't clearly see Mu Chen's strength, he had a vague feeling that Mu Chen was probably just at the level of a spiritual supreme, heavenly supreme. The 100 Spirits King was only a lower Earth Supreme, far from being on the same level as the heavenly supremes, the peak figures of the Great Thousand Worlds. However, because of his parents, he knew well that even among the heavenly supremes, there were distinct levels. A spirit-grade heavenly supreme was utterly powerless in the presence of an immortal-grade heavenly supreme. It was precisely because of this confidence that, even after learning that Mu Chen was a heavenly supreme, the 100 Spirits King still showed no fear. Immortal-grade heavenly supreme, quite impressive, Mu Chen nodded and then said, "But you're still a waste." A mocking smile on the 100 Spirits King's face froze, his hand gripping the armrest of the chair so tightly that it shattered. He hadn't expected Mu Chen to be so arrogant, even after knowing that his father was an immortal-grade heavenly supreme, still showing him no respect. Beside the 100 Spirits King, another elder in black robes stepped forward, his face grave. He cupped his hands and said, "Esteemed sir, you've already crippled our Northern Profound sect's elder. That should have quelled your anger. Why persist in making things difficult for us? If you could step back just this once, we, the Northern Profound sect, would not pursue this matter any further." As an elder of the Northern Profound sect, the black-robed elder knew very well the power of a heavenly supreme. Although the 100 Spirits King had a powerful background, if he truly angered this young heavenly supreme, they could be killed here in an instant. Even if the 100 Spirits King's father came for revenge later and killed Mu Chen, they would be long dead by then. Elder Liu, stop fearing him. Today, I want to see what he can do to me. Even if he kills me, my father will make him pay with his life. A heavenly supreme dying alongside me won't be an unjust death. Seeing the black-robed elder trying to calm things down, the 100 Spirits King sneered, unwilling to back down. His eyes turned cold as he glared at Mu Chen, full of provocation. Over the years, leveraging his parents' power, no one had dared to defy him. Yet today, he was called a waste on the spot, which enraged the 100 Spirits King. He was full of ruthless determination and had no fear of Mu Chen suddenly killing him. "Seems like you really don't believe I dare to kill you," Mu Chen casually toyed with the wine cup, a cold smile on his face. However, within his voice, there was a chilling killing intent that caused the entire hall to turn icy. The leaders of various factions shuddered, their eyes wide with fear as they looked at Mu Chen. Could this guy really be bold enough to kill the 100 Spirits King here? If the 100 Spirits King were to die, the furious Northern Profound Sect Lord and 100 Flowers Sect Lord would likely turn the 100 Spirits continent into a river of blood. You brat. Mu Feng couldn't help but speak out. It wasn't that he was afraid of the 100 Spirits King, but he was worried that Mu Chen would actually kill him. If that happened, his parents would surely take revenge on Mu Chen. Though he didn't know just how strong Mu Chen had become, the vengeance of two heavenly supremes would undoubtedly be terrifying. Therefore, he would rather hold his tongue than risk Mu Chen taking such a dangerous step. Behind him, Tang Shan and other senior figures from the Northern Spirit Alliance were uneasy. With things escalating to this point, they could no longer intervene. But they knew that if the 100 Spirits King died here, once his parents retaliated, the entire Northern Spirit Realm would likely face a catastrophic blow. After all, while Mu Chen's strength was terrifying, how could he possibly withstand two heavenly supremes? One of whom was an immortal-grade heavenly supreme, no less. Mu Chen. Tang Xun'er also tugged at Mu Chen. Though the 100 Spirits King was extremely detestable, his background was undeniably strong. If they completely tore the facade today, it would be unwise. Seeing this, Mu Chen smiled at them and said, "Trust me, I'll handle this." Seeing Mu Chen smile, Mu Feng didn't say anything more. He knew his son well. Mu Chen was not someone who acted rashly. Since he was doing this, there must be some trump cards up his sleeve. Tang Xun'er hesitated for a moment before gently nodding. As Mu Chen reassured Mu Feng and Tang Xun'er, the 100 Spirits King was watching closely. Seeing their hesitation, he knew his threat had worked, and a more arrogant smile spread across his face. So what if Mu Chen was a heavenly supreme? In the face of his parents' might, even he would have to bow down. Seems you're quite confident in your parents. Mu Chen's nonchalant voice rang out as the 100 Spirits King was basking in his moment of pride. Mu Chen smiled faintly and said, "Since that's the case, I'll give you a chance. Call your parents over. I want to see who can save you today." The 100 Spirits King's pupils constricted slightly as his gaze turned cold and murderous, fixated on Mu Chen. "This master." The black-robed elder hurriedly spoke up. Mu Chen ignored his words and spoke directly to him. "I'll give you half a day. Bring every ally you can muster." His voice suddenly paused. He extended a finger and gently pointed at the 100 Spirits King. Boom. One of the 100 Spirits King's arms exploded into pieces, blood gushing out. Mu Chen didn't even spare a glance at the howling 100 Spirits King. With a flick of his sleeve, he threw the bloody arm to the black-robed elder, whose expression was filled with shock. "Take this with you," Mu Chen said calmly. "Otherwise, they might think I'm joking." The entire hall was deathly silent as everyone watched the 100 Spirits King clutching his mangled arm, howling in pain. No one had expected Mu Chen to act with such resolve. It seemed clear now that he was prepared to sever ties with the 100 Spirits King's family. The black-robed elder, holding the severed arm, looked horrified. "Elder Lu, go. Go quickly and bring my parents. Today, I'll make this bastard wish he were dead. I'll kill his entire family." The 100 Spirits King screamed, his face twisted in rage, filled with deep resentment. Mu Chen's brows furrowed slightly, and he pointed again. The 100 Spirits King's other arm exploded as well. "Then take both of them," Mu Chen said casually, tossing the second arm to the black-robed elder. His smile, however, sent chills down the elder's spine. The black-robed elder, holding two severed limbs, gritted his teeth. "Master Mu, you've truly caused a massive problem this time. You will regret this." With those words, he dared not stay any longer. He shot up into the air like a streak of light, rushing straight toward the teleportation spirit array in the city center. As the black-robed elder departed, the atmosphere in the hall grew heavy and oppressive. Despite his severed limbs, the 100 Spirits King glared at Mu Chen, his eyes still burning with hatred. He didn't scream out in pain this time, evidently waiting for his parents to arrive. When they did, he would make sure to twist the limbs of every member of Mu Chen's family, torturing them to death piece by piece. Mu Chen, however, seemed unperturbed by the grim atmosphere. He turned to Mu Feng and flashed him a mischievous grin. "Old man, I brought someone back." At this moment, Mu Feng was preoccupied with the prospect of the 100 Spirits King's parents arriving and didn't care much about Mu Chen's words. He replied with annoyance, "I don't care who you've brought." Hearing this, Mu Chen's expression turned slightly strange, as if he were savoring some misfortune. Mu Feng noticed the odd look on Mu Chen's face, but before he could inquire, a soft snort sounded from outside the hall. "Oh, not interested in me either." As the voice reached their ears, the leaders of the various factions in the hall saw a graceful, beautiful figure step into the room. Her captivating eyes fixed on Mu Feng. Smack. Mu Feng's eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the woman entering the hall. Her figure was so deeply etched into his mind that, even after years of separation, it remained vivid and clear. Every smile and frown on her face sent a tremor through his heart. Years ago, to protect the infant Mu Chen, Qing Yanjing had chosen to leave. One could imagine how torn Mu Feng had been at that time. On one side, the woman he loved, and on the other, his own flesh and blood. Over the years, as he raised Mu Chen, Mu Feng had carried the weight of loneliness and longing. He thought about that woman almost every day, but he knew how impossible it would be to see her again. So, in front of Mu Chen, he never showed these emotions, even though his heart was always full of anticipation. When Mu Chen left the northern spirit realm, he promised to bring Qing Yanjing back so that their family could reunite. At the time, Mu Feng had dismissed it as a youthful boast, knowing how difficult it would be to make it happen. So when he heard Mu Chen say he brought someone back, Mu Feng hadn't even considered the possibility. He never imagined that Mu Chen had actually done it. "Xiaoqing," Mu Feng murmured, his voice trembling with emotion. The graceful figure slowly approached, standing before Mu Feng. She gazed at his determined face, now much more weathered than it had been in the past, and her eyes couldn't help but fill with moisture. Years ago, she had lost her way and arrived at the 100 Spirit continent, heavily wounded and on the brink of becoming a cripple. At that time, she was already at the pinnacle of Earth Supreme, and the faint spiritual energy emanating from her body had attracted all the spirit beasts in the forest who tried to devour her. It was in that moment of near despair that she encountered Mu Feng, a man who had seemed extremely weak in her eyes but had unhesitatingly carried her on his back, escaping from the encirclement of countless spirit beasts. Even though he was covered in injuries, even when facing the brink of life and death, he never once put her down. Although at the time, Qing Yanjing had thought his actions were a bit stubborn and foolish, they stirred something within her. She had encountered many prodigies, but when faced with life-threatening situations, abandoning a companion to save oneself was common. She had rarely met someone who, upon their first meeting, was so foolish as to risk their life to save another. "You've grown old," Qing Yanjing said softly, her slightly cold hand gently brushing against Mu Feng's face, which was covered in stubble. Mu Feng awkwardly scratched his head and said, "But you're still as beautiful as ever. You haven't changed at all. Weren't you just saying you weren't interested in me?" Qing Yanjing smiled slightly. It was clear that no matter how gentle a woman might seem, when facing someone she loved, she was never as easy to handle as she appeared. Mu Feng, a bit flustered, glared at Mu Chen, who was watching them with amusement. "It's all this little brat's fault." Qing Yanjing chuckled lightly. She understood that Mu Feng didn't mean it that way. She then extended her delicate hand to hold his rough one. "If it weren't for Xun'er, I might still not have made it back. You've trained Xun'er so well, it seems I haven't failed my promise to you," Mu Feng said, sighing with emotion. Truth be told, he was a bit stunned by how successful his son had suddenly become, achieving such high status. But in front of his wife, he couldn't show weakness. He coughed lightly and said, "Although I've been very attentive in my education, this little brat does have some talent. My guidance hasn't been in vain." Mu Chen couldn't help but roll his eyes. However, Mu Feng soon snapped out of his earlier excitement, realizing that the current situation wasn't ideal. The leaders of various factions in the Grand Hall were all watching the reunion between him and his wife with interest. With so many eyes on them, Mu Feng's face flushed, and he complained to Qing Yanjing, "Sigh, Xiaoqing, this little brat never stays quiet. He's always causing trouble." He was still worried. What if the parents of the 100 Spirit King arrived later? How would they handle the situation? If things went awry, Mu Feng might have to ask Mu Chen to quickly escort Qing Yanjing away. Qing Yanjing smiled at his words. "Xun'er knows what he's doing. Let him be." She then turned to look at Tang Xun'er and smiled, saying, "You must be Xun'er, right?" Tang Xun'er had been staring at Qing Yanjing in awe, as she had never met Mu Chen's mother. When she heard Qing Yanjing address her, she nervously nodded, unsure how to respond. She then looked at Mu Chen, uncertain of what to call her. "My mother is Qing Yanjing," Mu Chen said with a smile. "Hello, Aunt Jing," Tang Xun'er said sweetly. Qing Yanjing smiled warmly and said, "I've heard Mu Chen mention that you grew up together. Since you've called me aunt, I'll give you a little gift." She took out a crystal pendant, with a small hexagonal crystal compass on it, covered in intricate patterns. "Thank you, and Jing," Xun'er said, quickly taking the pendant, her face filled with joy. Though she admired the pendant's beauty, only Chen could sense that the pendant contained a master-level spirit formation, capable of blocking even a full-force attack from a spirit-grade heavenly supreme in times of crisis. It was clearly a protective treasure. At this moment, Lingxi and Longxiang also walked in. Longxiang's arrival caused many people in the hall to glance in his direction. They couldn't gauge Chen's true strength, but they could clearly feel the pressure emanating from Longxiang. He was undoubtedly a genuine Earth Supreme at the pinnacle stage, no less formidable than the two guarding elders of the 100 Spirits King. "This is Lingxi, she has always followed me, and I treat her like my own daughter," Qing Yanjing said, holding Lingxi's hand as she spoke to Mu Feng. Lingxi hesitated for a moment, glancing at Mu Feng, then respectfully said, "Lingxi greets Uncle Mu." Mu Feng smiled warmly, nodding in approval. He seemed to like Lingxi a lot and said gently, "Good, good. A daughter is much better than that mischievous boy who only enjoys watching his old father's embarrassment." Lingxi couldn't help but smile in return. "Greetings, master. I am the guardian of the matriarch, Longxiang said respectfully, bowing to Mu Feng. Mu Feng, slightly embarrassed, hurriedly helped him up. Longxiang was an Earth Supreme at the pinnacle stage, a powerhouse who would be considered a great force in the 100 Spirit continent. Even the 100 Spirits King would have to show him respect. Seeing him bow to Mu Feng like this made Mu Feng feel uncomfortable. In order to ease the awkwardness, Mu Feng introduced some of his close friends from the Northern Spirit Alliance, such as Tang Shan and others, to Qing Yanjing. She greeted them with a gentle smile, her demeanor warm and approachable. Chen couldn't help but chuckle inwardly at this scene. If they only knew that his mother was a Saint-grade grandmaster, they probably wouldn't even have the courage to speak to her. While Chen's side was full of activity, the leaders of the various factions in the Great Hall remained silent, unwilling to disturb the scene or approach to make small talk. They all knew that when the 100 Spirits King's parents arrived, there would undoubtedly be an earth-shaking clash. If Chen was unable to hold his ground, today, meant to be a joyous occasion for the couple, could very well turn into a day of mourning. At this moment, who would dare to form any connection with the Northern Spirit Alliance? On the central throne, the Northern Spirit King, whose arms had been severed, glared at Chen and his group with eyes full of resentment, silently cursing, "Go ahead and laugh. When my parents arrive, you won't even be able to shed a single tear." However, Chen paid no attention to the Northern Spirit King's malicious glare. The reason he had summoned the 100 Spirits King's reinforcements was to deal with this matter decisively. The Northern Spirit Realm was located in the 100 Spirit Continent, and here was Mu Feng's life's work. While it may not hold much value in Chen's eyes at the moment, it was of great importance to Mu Feng. So, to ensure the Northern Spirit Alliance's peace in the future, he had to resolve everything thoroughly. Whether it was the 100 Spirits King or the Northern Profound Sect Master behind him, if this matter wasn't cleared up now, there could be hidden dangers when Chen eventually left. With these thoughts in mind, Chen quietly sat to the side, waiting for time to pass. As time ticked by, the leaders in the hall grew increasingly uneasy, sensing that a storm was approaching. The setting sun gradually dipped lower, casting a reddish glow over 100 Spirit City. Buzz. Suddenly, Chen opened his eyes, sensing a massive surge of spiritual energy emanating from the city's teleportation spirit array. "They're finally here," Chen muttered softly. And just as his words fell, an overwhelming wave of spiritual energy swept through the air, enveloping everything. The entire sky seemed to be covered by it, and people all over 100 Spirit City shuddered in fear under the weight of the spiritual pressure. The powerful spiritual pressure tore through space, instantly manifesting above the Great Hall. Boom. The Great Hall trembled violently, and everyone watched in as the dome of the hall was blasted open. Terrifying spiritual pressure descended from above, and at the same time, a woman's cold and murderous voice rang out across the hall. "Who dares to be so foolish as to sever my son's arms? Come out and face me." Boom. At that moment, an invisible hand tore apart the roof of the hall. The fading sunlight poured in, but as the light touched the people inside, they felt not warmth but an ice-cold terror. As the fading sun's light streamed in, it was accompanied by a chilling, murderous aura that sent a shiver down one's spine. In the grand hall, trembling gazes slowly lifted, and what they saw shocked them. High above, a vast surge of spiritual energy had formed thick, rolling clouds. Amidst these ethereal clouds, a woman in royal robes stood suspended in midair. Her eyes, sharp like blades, emitted a frosty chill. The mere sweep of her gaze made one's eyes burn with pain, and no one dared meet her stare. A tremendous, unmatched spiritual pressure emanated from her, spreading outwards and enveloping the entire 100-spirit city. Under this overwhelming heavenly supreme's force, countless people in the city were shaking in terror. Gazing at the woman in the royal robes, the leaders of various forces from the 100-spirit continent all trembled, clearly recognizing her. She was none other than the mother of the 100 Spirits King, the sect master of the 100 Flowers sect, Willow 100 Blossoms, and a spirit-grade heavenly supreme. Mother, please, save me. The 100 Spirits King, seeing his mother appear, instantly screamed in desperation. The emotions he had previously suppressed under Mu Chen's pressure exploded violently. That bastard severed my arms. You cannot let him get away with this. High above, Willow 100 Blossom's heart nearly burst with fury upon seeing her son, the 100 Spirits King, in such a dire state, his arms severed and drenched in blood. She had always regarded her son as her heart's treasure, even allowing him to dominate a whole continent and become a local tyrant. This was a testament to how dearly she cherished him. But now, her beloved son had been mutilated. How could she not be furious? Don't worry, my son. Your father is on his way, along with several of his closest allies. Today, I will see which fool dares to harm my son on the 100-spirit continent. Willow 100 Blossom's voice was icy, devoid of any warmth. Upon hearing this, Mu Feng and the others turned pale. They hadn't expected Mu Chun to have stirred up such a hornet's nest. From the looks of it, the sect master of the Northern Profound sect not only came in person but also brought reinforcements. Willow 100 Blossom's cold gaze swept across the hall, and her voice, filled with freezing intent, rang out, "Who did this?" Inside the hall, all eyes involuntarily turned towards Mu Chen. He casually played with a jade cup in his hand before slowly lifting his head to meet Willow 100 Blossom's gaze and said, "From the looks of it, you're not here to apologize, are you?" Willow 100 Blossoms laughed bitterly in rage, her voice chilling as she spat. "Apologize? Are you out of your mind?" Mu Chen remained unfazed, replying calmly, "You allowed this fool to wreak havoc on the 100-spirit continent, injure my father, and attempt to force my friend to marry him. Since you turned a blind eye to it, I'll take it upon myself to deal with it. You are nothing but a brat." Willow 100 Blossom's anger flared, her brows furrowing as she snarled, "The 100-spirit continent was given to my son by my husband. He is its ruler, and he controls life and death here. If he did these things, so what?" "It seems you're an unreasonable fool," Mu Chen said with a slight frown. "In that case, from now on, this 100-spirit continent belongs to me. You little brat, you have no idea how high the heavens are." Willow 100 Blossoms sneered, stepping forward. As she moved, endless spiritual energy surged from her robes, turning into a torrential storm of flower petals that rained down, roaring toward Mu Chen. "You want to take over the 100-spirit continent? You're not even close to being capable of that." The storm of flower petals was dazzling, as bright as gemstones, each petal infused with condensed spiritual energy. Just one could easily wipe out a perfect Earth Supreme, and when gathered in such numbers, if Willow 100 Blossoms wished, she could wipe out the entire 100-spirit city in an instant. However, Mu Chen stood unfazed, his eyes unblinking as he watched the storm approach. At the early spiritual grade, his battle power had already been comparable to that of an initial immortal grade cultivator. Now that he had stepped into mid-spiritual grade, Willow 100 Blossoms, still only at early spiritual grade, was no threat to him. He simply opened his mouth and exhaled a breath, which instantly turned into a spiritual energy storm that swept across the flower rain. As the two collided, the storm of petals was torn apart without a trace. This scene caused many of the leaders in the hall to turn pale. Though they knew Mu Chen was also a spirit-grade heavenly supreme, they had not expected him to so effortlessly neutralize Willow 100 Blossom's attack. "So, you do have some skill. No wonder you dared act so brazenly." Willow 100 Blossom's eyes narrowed, her expression turning cold. She no longer held back. Brilliant spirit light erupted from her body, and in that instant, her entire form blazed with radiance. She had clearly activated her spirit body. Spirit Vein Divine Ability, 100 Flowers God Layer. With a frosty gaze, Willow 100 Blossoms extended her slender finger toward Mu Chen and pointed. Buzz! At the very moment her finger descended, everyone gasped in horror. Around Mu Chen, a strange blood-crimson flower suddenly bloomed, its petals unfolding to completely swallow him whole. "Humph! Just a greenhorn brat. Did you really think that ascending to the heavenly supreme realm gives you license to run wild? This spirit vein divine ability of mine is the most insidious. Once you're swallowed by it, even a spirit-grade heavenly supreme will have their spirit body dissolved by the flower's essence. Willow Blossoms sneered as she watched the blood-red flower engulf Mu Chen. Mu Feng and Tang Qian's expressions changed dramatically at the sight. But beside them, Qing Yinjing remained calm. She gently patted Mu Feng's hand, signaling that there was nothing to worry about. The leaders of the other factions silently shook their heads. From the looks of it, Willow Blossoms was clearly the more cunning and ruthless of the two. Haha. At the head seat, the 100 Spirits King burst into laughter, his eyes filled with venom as he stared at Mu Feng, Tang Xun'er, and the others. A spirit vein divine ability born from a single heaven vein. You make it sound far more impressive than it is. But just as the 100 Spirits King laughed, a voice echoed from within the blood-crimson flower. A heartbeat later, violet flames surged from inside it. As they burned, the terrifying flower, capable of trapping even a spirit-grade heavenly supreme, melted away at a shocking pace, completely disintegrating. High in the sky, Willow Blossoms' eyes finally flickered with shock. She knew better than anyone the power of her spirit vein divine ability. Against someone of the same level, even with exceptional skill, they'd still struggle to break free quickly. But Mu Chen hadn't even been trapped for a few seconds. Looks like there's no reasoning with a brainless woman like you. Mu Chen raised his head, his gaze emotionless as he looked at Willow Blossoms. In that case, let fists do the talking. As his voice fell, Mu Chen opened his mouth once more. The next instant, blazing violet flame burst forth, taking the form of a violet flame dragon that soared into the skies, roaring as it charged straight toward Willow Blossoms. Seeing the incoming violet flame dragon, Willow Blossoms' pupils contracted. Having witnessed the might of those flames earlier, she dared not take them lightly. Her jade hands formed a seal as a vast surge of spiritual energy erupted, creating layers of floral walls condensed from spiritual power. Though delicate and ornate in appearance, these floral walls possessed remarkable durability, capable of withstanding full-force attacks from a spirit-grade heavenly supreme. Yet in the face of the violet flame dragon, they proved laughably fragile. The dragon barreled through them, igniting them on contact. Every defense crumbled in an instant. Finally, fear appeared on Willow Blossoms' face. Even her strongest defensive technique crumbled before the violet flame dragon. Only now did she realize the chasm between her strength and Mu Chen's. Damn it. I underestimated him. I need to retreat, wait until my husband arrives with reinforcements. Then we'll deal with this bastard. Clenching her teeth, she transformed into a streak of spirit light, darting away at full speed. But her retreat sent shockwaves through the onlookers in the grand hall. None of them had expected the formidable sect leader of the 100 Flowers sect to be forced into such a pitiful retreat after barely exchanging 2 moves with Mu Chen. In that moment, all eyes on Mu Chen were filled with a growing awe. The power he had displayed was clearly far beyond that of Willow Blossoms. Even the previously jeering 100 Spirits King was struck dumb, his face turning ashen. You came here, and now you think you can leave? Mu Chen paid no attention to the others. His eyes locked coldly on the fleeing Willow Blossoms. With a chilling smile, he formed a hand seal, and the violet flame dragon exploded in the air, transforming into a massive violet flame hand that tore through the void and came crashing down toward her. Boom. The impact struck Willow Blossoms like a thunderclap. She plummeted from the sky, smashing into the ground of the city below. A massive crater opened where she fell, cracks spreading outwards, and she lay at its center, battered, scorched, and utterly humiliated. Boom. However, Mu Chen clearly had no intention of showing her any mercy. The massive purple flame hand clenched into a fist, carrying the force of destruction, and mercilessly swept downward. Such a heavy blow, if struck, would shatter the spirit body of even someone as powerful as Lu Baiwa, a spirit-grade heavenly supreme. The purple flame heavy fist held down, and Lu Baiwa's face turned pale, her eyes filled with terror. Clearly, she hadn't expected Mu Chen to be this ruthless. Whoosh. Amid the astonished gazes of countless onlookers, the purple flame heavy fist descended, and it seemed as though the entire 100 Spirit City trembled violently at that moment. Smoke and dust billowed, and everyone turned their gaze to that area, horrified. Could it be that Lu Baiwa had actually been killed with a single punch from Mu Chen? Mu Chen also looked over, his eyes narrowing slightly. As the smoke and dust gradually cleared in the massive crater, the purple flame heavy fist was still in its downward motion, But several feet above Lu Baihua, a spinning azure tortoise shell appeared, glowing with green light, protecting Lu Baihua from the blow. Mu Chen glanced at the azure tortoise shell, then stretched lazily, his eyes cold and unperturbed, and he turned his gaze toward the distance. In the sky above, 4 figures stood suspended. Wave after wave of imposing and terrifying spiritual pressure emanated from their bodies. Among these 4, a man in a green robe had a stern face. His somewhat icy gaze pierced through the void, locking directly onto Mu Chen in the Great Hall. His voice, like thunder, resounded through the heavens and earth. "You're bullying my wife and children. You truly don't take me, Qin Beixian, seriously, do you?"